Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. I'm Justin Lewis, your host for today, and today's actually a very special episode. Back in December of 2024, I was privileged enough to be able to be a panelist on a couple of panels at Dragon Steel Nexus 2024, which is the convention for the Dragon Steel Publishing Company, which, if you don't know, you should look it up because it is the publishing company from Brandon Sanderson. So Way of Kings, Elantris, Mistborn, a lot of really great books. He's an amazing author, and it was awesome to be able to panel at his convention. Honestly, kind of one of our first experiences paneling. Anyways, I'll save that for the end. Listen up to our conversation. This is GMing 101 at Dragon Steel Nexus 2024. If you are a patron of the show, stick around for after the credits. I'm going to kind of talk about my experience and give you a little bit of behind-the-scenes look at how it was and how close I got to peeing my pants. So stick around, but before that, let's get to today's show. Also, for you YouTube watchers, sorry we don't actually have the video, so you'll just have to content yourself with a nice logo screen while you listen to our content. Thank you much, and we'll talk to you after the show.
All right. Hey, welcome to GM 101, guys. Thank you so much for being here. So we're going to start out real quick by introducing ourselves, and then we'll get to some more fun stuff. So why don't you start?
Cool. I am Justin Lewis. I am one of the hosts of How to Be a Better DM, which is a podcast that's designed to help you become the world's best dungeon master. Statistically, you're out there somewhere, so hopefully you're in this room, and hopefully I get to meet you. We have episodes every Thursday, give or take. We also have an actual play podcast. You can find all that on sessionzerostudios.com. Also, for those of you in the back, if you can't hear us at any point during this conversation, do this or something crazy, and we'll talk louder, probably tell you to sit down or something like that. Colby.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Colby Polson, and as you can see, I am expert. That's all I got. I run a YouTube channel called D4, D&D Deep Dive. Thank you. I've been doing that for about 4 or 5 years. I've been playing D&D since I was 12. And I just really love all things tabletop role-playing game, and so I'm just happy to be here and geek out about more role-playing game stuff.
Hi, I'm Darcy Cole. I am a fantasy author. I write young adult fantasy fairy tale retellings, so come see me at my booth in the exhibitor hall. I've been playing D&D for a lot less time than any of these others. We started playing in, I think, 2019, my husband and I, and had a very simple start. Someone else DM'd for us, and eventually we started running our own games and running some for our kids, and I set a goal last year to run as many one-shots as I could within like 6 months, and I think I got through like 8 or 9. And so it was a really cool exercise and a lot of fun. I learned a lot about the story of gaming and that kind of stuff. So like Colby, I'm just happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Lydia's son. I lost my nameplate after moderating the Moash panel earlier today, so please accept my shame in handwritten form. I am a game designer, lead writer of the Cosmere RPG, so holler if you back that. Thank you, y'all are awesome. And I also do a lot of work for Edge Studios, so like Arkham Horror RPG and Adventures from Rokugan, as well as Neon Vigil, which is a new indie RPG, which is launching here in the exhibitor hall. So very exciting.
Nice. All right, so as far as the organization of this panel, we will give you guys opportunities to ask questions. There is an audience mic right there. We're going to break for questions every few minutes probably, and also we'll leave as much time at the end as we can. So first, so that we can get to know you guys a little bit, please raise your hand if you've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for a year or more. Okay? Put your hand down. Oh, well, wait. Yeah, or longer.
keep 'em
okay,
up, keep
keep
'em
them
up.
up. Keep them up. Or you can stand. Do you guys want to stand? You probably don't want to stand. Keep your hands up. If you've been playing for more than 5 years, keep your hand up. Okay. More than 10, 15, 20,
All right, we still got-
25.
Yeah, in the back.
Nice in the back.
Okay, now we got to have you guys stand
Yeah,
up.
come on,
Yes,
stand
You guys
up.
gotta
Come
stand
on.
up now.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Celebration.
And how many of you guys have DM'd or GM'd games before? Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so good. So maybe a lot of the stuff we say you guys already know.
So maybe you
Who
guys
knows?
should. Some
Maybe
of you should be up here.
Yeah, those 25ers. Yeah.
We didn't say we GM'd well.
That's a fair point.
To be fair, neither did we.
Yes, that's true.
That's true. All right. A couple more fun questions. Of those GMs, who has accidentally killed their party?
The whole party.
The whole
TPK.
party, TPK. Oh, geez. Okay, hands down. Who has made a player cry?
On purpose.
On purpose? How about on accident?
On accident.
Yeah, there you go. And how many of you have spent longer planning a session than the session actually took? There it is. Awesome. Okay, so some common experiences among us, perhaps. So right now we're gonna kind of bounce back and forth. We each kind of came up with 3 of our top tips for GMing. So we're gonna start with Justin, and we're gonna kind of bounce around some different things. And if you guys have questions, feel free to stand up and go over to the mic. Okay? So go ahead, Justin.
Perfect. So I saw, excuse me, I saw that there were a lot of people who did not raise your hand, and presumably you're here to look at our beautiful faces. No, you're probably here because you are interested in becoming a GM, right? And this is exactly the place to be, because we're going to help you maybe have the confidence to take those first steps. And I think for a lot of GMs, the scariest thing is knowing how much to plan or what to plan, or knowing when you're ready to do the first session. And so I'd like to recommend using what I call the CASE method. It's just a little framework you can use to kind of scope out what you need to plan. And CASE stands for campaign, arc, as in story arc, session, encounter. And it works just like a Russian nesting doll. Encounters fit inside sessions, which fit inside story arcs, which fit inside a campaign. And this is helpful to you because you can know where the story lies, right? If it's a campaign level story you're telling, if it's a story arc story you're telling, if it's just a single session or just an encounter. And that can help you know how long you need it to go. You can plan how many story arcs are in the campaign. You can know how many sessions are in the story arc. And obviously, I mean, no plan survives contact with the enemy, right? Once you guys know that. Once you make a plan, you give it to your players, and then the plan's gone. But at least you have a plan. It's also helpful because you can create themes that exist within their particular scope. When you're only focusing on the particular story arc, you can step back from the campaign theme for just a minute and explore other themes. And then when the campaign's done, you can show how all of the story arc themes fit together. And I like this way because it helps me remember that when I'm planning my next session, I don't have to plan the campaign. When I do have ideas for the campaign, I can write those down and I can save them for later. And when they show up, I'm happy. But all I need to do is plan my session, which means my encounters, basically.
Quince. I really liked seeing you mention that in our chat, because having done so many one-shots, it really is, it's that session and encounter, right? Because that's all you're doing for a one-shot. You don't have to worry about a longer character arcs or story arcs or anything like that. You're just doing that section. And so that was one of the kind of things that I wanted to talk about, was the short form versus long form planning and storytelling, right? Because as a person who writes novels, me, I had this idea of what a story arc looked like, and trying to fit that into a single session doesn't work. You can't do that, right? And even, looking at, like, I would start with originally I started with a beat sheet, like I would outline a novel, and, I'd have a beginning and a midpoint and an ending, that kind of stuff. And I found that it was way too many points. Like, honestly, when you're planning a session, you really only need like 3 or 4, you know what I mean? And your players will fill in the rest. Like, they are your characters, and so if you give them that freedom to kind of explore and discover the world that you've created or the module that you're using, they'll do it. You just have to kind of give them the reins. So
Yeah, you hear a lot of times people will explain D&D and say, well, it's kind of like improv comedy, right? It's a series of yes and moments, and I think sometimes we can forget as DMs that that's supposed to happen with us too, between us and our players, not just between the players themselves, right? And sometimes we get in the habit of over planning and over preparing. And I was on a panel earlier today, and I don't know if any of you were there, but one person talks about how, it's like, I'll spend 6 hours planning out this amazing castle that, like, I want my players to go to, and then as soon as the session starts, they're all like, oh, look at that caravan over there. Like, we don't want to go in the castle. And you're like, but this castle is really beautiful. Please go in the castle. No, they don't want to. And so, yeah, that's always the risk. And that's not to say that you couldn't use that castle later, right? And maybe now it's a different castle, but it's actually the same castle. Or maybe it's not a castle, it's a dungeon, but it's basically the same thing that you've already kind of planned, So you can having plans and being prepared for what your players might do to kind of go sideways is a good thing, and being able to continue to use stuff that you have prepared, be open to finding ways to put that in at later points if the opportunity presents itself, right?
Yeah. Having that it's the flexibility of story, right?
I'd also, if I can add,
Yeah.
I think that might be one big thing that holds a lot of possible DMs back is trust. Being or GM, sorry. Being a GM, you have to develop these meta skills, and one of them is trust, both with yourself and your players. And I think a lot of GMs don't have that trust in themselves to know what to do next when they don't go with the plan, when they, go into the gray area or things like that. I mean, you know what to do, right? You make stuff up every day because you don't follow a plan going to, the bus stop or whatever it is, right?
Just make it up, guys. Like, be prepared to make it up. So, let's see. I think
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
On that note, what is the goofiest curveball your players have given?
The question was, what was the goofiest curveball your players have ever sent you?
Also, as a reminder, there's a mic right there in case anyone
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
in the future.
Anybody want to take that one?
I'll take it. With one from, I was running demos for Stormlight RPG here. I see some of my crew in the audience. Hi. We had a ridiculous moment. So we were just teasing some of the Stonewalkers adventure, kind of running that. And I had a group where there was a scholar who the whole time would not participate in combat. To everybody's, everyone's like, please just use your knife, do something. And it became this bit where the scholar's like, okay, the only thing I would do to attack somebody is throw a glob of wax at them. And I'm over here like, I'll let it happen, right? Like, whatever, not my consequence, mess around and find out. So this is a bit, it's very ineffective, the entire 4-hour demo, until right at the end, when they're fighting the big bad, who is extremely dangerous, has killed almost all of the allies, is now coming for the party, has 1 hit point left, and it's about to be his turn again, where he's gonna just decimate everybody with an otter blade. And what does the scholar do? Throws the glob of wax. And I'm like, cool, whatever, we'll just, end it on a silly note, whatever, you are consenting to a TPK, whatever, all good. nat 20 with a opportunity on the plot die, which is our special mechanic, which is a double opportunity. I'm like, listen, I'll give it to you. Like, that's fair. Like, I'm not going to intervene. So I think that takes the cake for the silliest for me.
That's amazing.
I got one too. I was taking my party through. We were playing D&D, and it was an arc going through my version of the Astral Sea, which is kind of in this campaign was similar to like Treasure Planet, and like I don't know, just it was just all of the science fiction fantasies that I wanted to go through. They ended up on a planet called Market City, which is just a big market, right? And one of my players is a real estate agent and has pretty good understanding of how money works, like lending, hard money lenders, stuff like that. I don't. So he and the Changeling Sorcerer, also a bad idea, they essentially conned a hard money lender to give them like 70,000 gold, and conned the hard money lender, it was me, because I'm an idiot. And then they ended up stealing a spaceship that they were going to buy the gold with, so they had the gold and the spaceship. And again, I don't know how money works, so like I was in a bad spot. But that was fun to deal with. I ended up sending debt collectors to go get the ship back from them, and they were scared, so it ended up funny, but I was pretty sad.
I think mine is not when I was a GM, but when I was a player. It was, and I don't know if this is funny so much as maybe sad. It was the very first session that we were playing with our kids, our sons, and they didn't have a great idea of how the game worked yet. We were on a road. My husband is covering his face. We were on a road to traveling to our next city or whatever, and we had a random encounter. We encountered what was it called? An on-keg. And it was only the three of us, and we were only level 1. So it did not go well. We probably would have been fine, except that our 12-year-old decided to try to intimidate the on-keg instead of fighting it, which resulted in me dying. So then they had to go on their own little quest to get a diamond to revivify me, and so it ended up being fun for them, but it was definitely definitely a curveball for my sweet husband. So.
Mine will be quick. In a Curse of Strahd campaign, I was doing my best to discourage my brand new level 1 players from actually engaging in the dire wolves that were clearly coming and that they were clearly not prepared to handle, and they just refused to run. And they insisted on standing their ground and fighting, and they TPK'd. And I'm just like I'm not going to pull my punches here, guys. Like, this is a dangerous place. I'm trying to help you understand that this is a dangerous place, and you're just not getting it. So I'm just going to show you.
When the GM says the safety's off, the safety is off.
Yeah, exactly.
But sometimes the players also have to go through that learning curve as players, right?
It's true.
So yeah.
And to that point, if I had been GMing that, I would have probably gone through the TPK, and because I'm such a softie, I would have been like, let's rewind. Let's try that again.
Yeah, Strahd showed up, and he reprimanded them all for being not entertaining enough, and gave him a second chance.
That's amazing. I love it.
But yeah. Anyways.
Cool. All right, we have a few questions. Shall we take some, or do you want to finish?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to just
real quick.
Yeah, we have a little bit of planned programming. So what I was going to talk about today is just group communication. As a GM, this is something oftentimes people don't really think about. It's something that's not as flashy to talk about, but it will really help you have better games. It will help your campaigns last longer and your players to stay engaged, and it will help you to be a more versatile GM. So the first thing I'm going to kind of touch on, who here knows what safety tools are in RPGs? Okay, a few of us. Who here knows what a session 0 is? Okay, yeah. So a session 0 is this beginning talk. You get together with your group, just like in writing, your first chapter makes promises to the reader, sets the tone. Your session 0 is going to make promises from the group to the group and set expectations for the game so that everybody has buy-in from the very beginning, everybody's engaged, everybody knows what behavior they should be keeping to within the gameplay. Safety tools are just different types of things you can use as a GM and as players to agree on what content is going to be acceptable in your game and what things, how to tailor the content to everybody's needs. And, you know, you want to be deliberate about this. If I say, hey, as a GM, I'm not going to GM anything above PG-13. That's my bar, right? Like, if I have a player say, hey, I'm really not comfortable with like romance or flirting or intimacy in my game, I'm like, cool, yeah, we'll do something else. You know, it's a group coming together to figure out what game is going to be mutually beneficial and enjoyable to everybody. This is going to help players stay engaged throughout the game and help kind of mitigate any potential scheduling issues, which we all know is the true death of a campaign. Like it really is. And so going on to kind of this next point, genre and theme expectations are extremely important. And if you are playing a certain system, and I have a lot of experience with this, I work on a lot of different systems, those genre and theme expectations might be a little bit different than another system. For example, I wrote the GM chapter for Arkham Horror RPG, which just came out recently, and that's a Lovecraftian game. There's a lot of things going on there. And a lot of times with Lovecraft, you end up with these really tragic, demoralizing, slow burn descent kind of stories. And for us, we said, that's great. That's a valid Lovecraftian RPG experience. It's not for everybody, but it's valid. Also valid, a really fun, fast and loose kind of silly, more like pulpy, you know, Pulp Fiction kind of vibe, where spooky things are happening, but you might do something silly to kind of interact with it. Silly breaks horror. I've worked on a lot of horror RPGs. Silly can be the enemy to horror. If you have a jokester in your group, like that's good and fine in certain games, but if you are running horror, your whole group needs to talk. Are we going to be cracking jokes the whole time, or are we going to let ourselves like get immersed into the creepy, right? So it's just kind of having these discussions with your group, figuring out what is the appropriate vibe, what's the tone we're all going to set. If we all like scary, what kind of scary is not okay with some of us? What kind of scary do we love? Like safety tools are not just, or you know, session zero's player communication. It's not just about what we don't want. It's a lot about what are we gonna load up our campaign with, so it's gonna be the coolest thing we've ever done. You know, what excites us, right?
To that point, I would say, I would just add, like, be very, very specific on this, right? If there's something specific, like in movies or in TV shows that you're like, ooh, I don't like that, right? You probably won't like it in your game. But on the flip side, if your character is really good at something and you're excited to use that skill or that tool, like, bring it up to your GM and they can put that in the story.
Yeah, just like an example of this is I even use safety tools when I run demos at cons. I run demos at cons like this, Gen Con, and I'll just kind of check in with everybody. So for example, with Stormlight RPG, like we know that there are some very strict gender roles in canon, and like, you know, I have worked with Brandon to make sure that our materials are canon and everything is up to his standard, and even include some cool new canon. And so I care about canon a lot. My day job involves a lot of gatekeeping canon, right? At a game table, if somebody's like, hey, I want to play a Vorin woman, but I don't want to have to bother with a safe hand pouch or, you know, a glove or whatever, that's not interesting to me. Or I want to play a singer character, but I just don't want to have to mitigate weirdness with having been previously enslaved, you know, before the Everstorm or whatever. I'm like, okay, we're just not going to focus on that in the game, right? We're not going to talk about that. There's plenty of really cool stuff on Roshar that we can, you know, investigate together and play with. We don't need to focus on that. So again, this is just your group figuring out what do we like, what do we not like. And then the last kind of tool is player etiquette and call-ins. Set an expectation with your players. What is acceptable behavior? Is talking over each other acceptable? Is being on your phones acceptable? Like, these things are okay in some groups, right? Just figure out what feels acceptable to your group. And then what happens if somebody breaks these rules, right? Like running a lot of con games, luckily I've had really good luck lately, but sometimes there are people who just want to make the entire game about them. They want to make everything about their character. They want to infringe upon other people's turns. And as a GM, you have to be able to calmly pull that back, right? And make sure everybody gets their piece. So however you need to do that is up to you. Some people can be more direct. I'm usually kind of soft. I have this joke with my coworkers. I have a con sit when I run demos where I put like one knee on a chair and like lean forward, because if somebody's introverted and isn't getting their moment, I will like lean across the table and make eye contact with them and be like, okay, wait, we're gonna hear from you, you know? So whatever your tool is to kind of draw out the introverts, because they deserve to take up space too. Whatever your tool is, just be willing to be like the leader, you know, pause and say, okay, we're gonna wait a minute. We're gonna make sure everybody gets their piece. So those are kind of my general tips on group communication.
Yeah. And I would add, like, most group issues are going to come back to communication. Like, you have to have, and it's going to take practice, right? If you've never GM'd before and you're nervous about this stuff, like, you're probably going to mess up. It's okay, right? Just know that when you have an issue, take a breath, take a step back, and talk to your players. You can talk to them one-on-one. It doesn't have to be during the session even. Like, address it. Because if you don't address it soon, it will become a problem.
I think that's a good tip just generally for really any issue. I think too often as DMs, we almost get this sense that like we're performing and like we need to be on all the time and kind of perfect. You know, just like Justin was talking earlier about, you know, kind of being prepared for when things go sideways. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, saying, okay, I was thinking you guys were going to go to the castle. I wasn't really planning on you following the caravan. Give me 5 minutes. Like, everybody, like, take a bio break, whatever. Get a drink of water. Like, give me 5 minutes. Let me just think about some things here for a second, and then we'll come back and, like, and keep going. And that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with, and especially, I mean, hopefully, the people that you're playing with, like, that's a safe space. You know what I mean? Like, you can just be like, hey, like, okay, like, I'm absolutely willing to run with this direction that you guys are wanting to go right now. Give me a second and let me just kind of figure this out for a minute, and then we'll keep going, right?
Do you have anything to add?
I was just going to say, honestly, this is why I think everyone should try GMing at some point in their life, because it'll make you a better person.
It'll make you a better player.
Yeah, well, no, just a person,
sure.
like a normal person, because you'll have to learn interpersonal communication. You'll have to learn how to be a leader. You'll have to learn how to deal with conflict. And these tools, you use them all the time. You come back to session 0, in between sessions, during sessions, whenever you need to, because they're so useful, because it's you collaborating with people so you can tell a collaborative story.
Yep.
I think one other thing regarding communication, I tend to do a lot of homebrew and house rules. At our table, there are a lot of things that in the DM guide and in the player's handbook that we're like, you know, so we, and in order to make our games more fun for us, we change some things around. That is something that you want to talk about during session 0, for sure. Make sure everybody agrees. And, you know, if you are in the middle of a campaign, maybe you homebrewed a cool weapon for somebody and it turns out that they end up killing all of the bad guys instead of all the other players and nobody else gets a turn. Fix that, right? Reevaluate, back it up. Be ready to balance things. You want everyone to be able to have equal time, like you were talking about. Everyone to be having fun. And if not everybody's having fun and enjoying their experience, then something's got to change and shift. So, yeah. Did you guys have any other points you wanted to talk about real quick?
Not on session 0 stuff.
Yeah, I have some other points. Did we want to move forward on
Or
that?
maybe we should take a question or two.
Let's take a few questions and we can get to you guys. Yeah, that's okay. Go for it.
Hello, my name is Daniel, and I had
Daniel.
a question about if you have like some players that want to cover something that you're not necessarily an expert or qualified to cover in, how can you best prepare yourself so you can still give them the experience that they want?
What do you mean by that? You're not an expert on covering. Like, give us an example.
One example
Like
would
my
be
example.
like Justin's example.
Like using a hard
or-
money lender in your game.
Okay.
Yeah, or even like if it's someone that wants to touch on ideas of like racism and how to overcome that, or trauma and overcome that, or even money lenders.
So I would.
It's pretty right up, Anna.
Right. So first of all, I would say that if you're not comfortable addressing it, then maybe that's just not something you do at your table, right? If they want to do that, then maybe they need to find a different GM, right?
Or be a GM themselves.
Or be a GM themselves, exactly. But if it is something more simple like that, like, what do you think?
I mean, first of all, if it's in the moment, you're screwed.
There's
right?
not a lot you can do.
I mean, you could ask ChatGPT, I guess. If you have some time, you can obviously research it, right? A lot of writers research things. You're supposed to write what you know. Being a GM's no different. You're supposed to use what you know and portray that. There is also nothing wrong with doing your best, right? I'm a big fan of the actual play show High Rollers out of the UK. Yeah, you guys are awesome. Mark Hulmes is awesome because he'll kind of do his best, and then me as a listener, I'm like, that's wrong. Like, I know. but you know, it's a story, and he goes through it, and they get through it, and it's fine. So does that answer your question at all?
Yeah.
I think too, you know, that's definitely an opportunity to kind of communicate with your player and say, hey, if you want to like take a deep dive into some sort of like, you know, traumatic experience that your player had as a child, you know, in their backstory, and we want to kind of find a way to help them work through their trauma or something, like, great. I'm not a therapist, but like, let's work together on this, and like, what do you think healing might look like for them? And you know what I mean? And maybe we can kind of plan out some touch points now, you know, on their journey, stuff like that, right? As long as it's not in the moment, and you can say, hey, let's talk about this offline, maybe between sessions, and make some plans.
So I have a quick thing to add. I have worked as a sensitivity consultant. I've worked with many sensitivity consultants in other areas for TTRPGs, and I have written the safety guide to many RPG books. And it is tricky, but there are things to do. First of all, ask yourself, why is this story one that we're telling at the table, right? Like, if it's to be just a fun story hook or something, maybe not the right choice, right? Why are you telling this story, first of all? Second of all, this story, are you the appropriate person to tell it, right? Like, I would argue that I would probably not be comfortable with a white player trying to have a black character whose main story is about the racism that they're experiencing. Like, I don't think that that's probably the appropriate situation, right? With that said, it's not like you can never play a character who's not like you. I think there are just a few things you want to do to be careful. So if this is something that your player relates to, whether that's like, you know, an aspect of their character's background that they relate to, as a GM, I would let them take the lead. Like, if I'm not an expert there, I'm gonna let them tell that story how they authentically know to tell it. And like, for example, in the Stormlight RPG, one thing we did is if your character has a disability, it's like you can work with the GM if you want to represent that mechanically, or you don't have to, right? But like, we're gonna let the player lead. We're gonna let the player be able to tell that story as long as they're doing it respectfully and earnestly. So like, research is important, but yeah, just kind of checking in what feels good. If something doesn't feel good to you and you can't explain why it doesn't feel good to you, don't do it. Right? Like, your instincts are telling you this is not a good situation, right? Just err on the side of keeping people comfortable, keeping people safe, and avoid major issues. Like in Adventures in Rokugan, which is this Japanese-inspired setting I worked on, in the safety guide, it's like, let's not use fake Japanese accents. That has such a history of racism. Let's not do that. Let's not only tell stories about honor and have that be like a one-dimensional character. So things like that, you know, just feel it out. If it feels wrong to you, you can't explain why, that's okay. That's still valid. There's probably a reason why you don't tread on that, you know, territory.
Yeah. I think constant check-ins too. Like, if this is something that's important to your player, that is also important to the character, you know, that you're not familiar with, be checking in with them and be like, how did I handle that? Was that good? Should we do it differently next time? That kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Cool.
Hi, my question has to do with creating campaigns. Like, whenever I
make one, I always know how I want it to start and end, but the middle, I get stuck a lot. Was wondering if you have any, like a process that you go through in filling out the middle section.
Sure.
Process guy.
Yeah.
Process guy.
Absolutely. So this is kind of back to what I was saying with the case method, right? Campaign is nothing more than story arcs, which are filled with sessions. So all you need to do is figure out what story arcs do you want to tell. And the nice thing about it is you don't need to have everything in the middle filled out. You're not writing a book, right? Which is a great thing if you're playing a TTRPG, because your players are going to be, I don't know, 75% of what actually happens, because they're going to make choices, and then you're going to react to those choices and then say, okay, well, what if they did this, right? And try and make them make other choices, or just, you're going to kind of be fiddling with them. So what I would suggest is, you know where you want to start, you know where you want to finish. Theoretically, that means you have the big bad, right? That's the problem. Now, you need to cut that problem into how it affects different things and how those minor problems get dealt with. From there, I would dig heavily into your players' backstories and build story arcs out of those. And in fact, you can probably interchange those two steps, right? But once you have kind of the general ideas for these story arcs, then you can get started on the second story arc, or maybe the third if you already have the second one started. You don't need to have like 4, 5, 6, however many you have ready. You just need to have an idea of what's going to come up later, right? Like we know, spoiler, Harry Potter at some point is going to fight Voldemort, but he's also going to maybe, discover some secrets along the way, maybe find a girlfriend, right? Those are all different story arcs, but they don't happen in the first book, right? You obviously have good taste. I mean, you listen to How to Be a Better DM, after all. We thank you so much for your support. And if you've ever gotten anything useful from How to Be a Better DM, take a minute and rate us and review us on your podcast listening app of choice. It goes a very long way to helping our show help many more dungeon masters out there who are just like you. If you love our content, help others become better dungeon masters too. Another ad break. Let's be real. Ads are the worst. If you're anything like my wife, you'd rather quit a show entirely than sit through another ad. So why suffer? Just skip them. Join our Patreon at patreon.com/betterdungeonmaster and enjoy ad-free episodes with exclusive patron-only content, all for just $5 a month. Look at you, all fancy with your uninterrupted listening experience. So stop wasting time on ads like this one. Go to patreon.com/betterdungeonmaster and upgrade your listening today. Spoiler alert, we are building an army. That's right. We're building an army of amazing dungeon masters who want to make the world of D&D a better place. If you want to join our army and fight by our side against the evil forces of boredom and bad DMing, join our Discord and lend your voice to the cause. Go to sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and join for free today. That's sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and enlist in the fight against boredom.
Does anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, as far like it's much more, brain. It's much easier for me to create from scratch. I struggle to do modules, so I really enjoy homebrewing, and I tend to do, like Justin is saying, I have a beginning, we have our players, I have an idea of what I want the ending to be, and like you said, you look at your players' backstories and start pulling on those threads, right? What I like to ask myself is, my players, I ask them for like, what's their character's greatest fear? What's their, what do they really want in life? You know what I mean? Those kinds of deeper questions. And then I ask myself, what does this character need to face in order to grow and change? And then I develop a story arc out of that, right? And so within that story arc, then you have sessions. You plan for NPCs for them to meet that are going to push them in that direction, right? You plan cities or locations that they can potentially go to, and you don't have to plan the whole world. You just have to plan one session at a time, right? And it can be a little nerve-wracking, knowing that, you know, you kind of don't really, it's like a car with headlights at night, you know what I mean? You only really see about 20 feet in front of you. But as long as you can see that 20 feet, like, you can keep going, right? Yeah. So, yeah. So does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Awesome.
Next question.
I like all the talk about planning, but we all have those weeks where time gets away from us, but we still really want to play. Do you have any tips and tricks for winging it?
Look up on D&D Beyond the monster list, and find one that looks fun. And stick it in front of your players and see what happens.
If I would just add one of the roles of the GM, sorry, is to be a mad scientist. I mentioned you kind of fiddle with things, right? It's always nice to ask these what if questions, and that's a nice way to plan a session without really having anything planned, right? For example, in my campaign, my private one that I'm doing right now, I hope none of my plays are in here, but I doubt it.
Spoilers.
They essentially went to this memorial service for someone that they didn't even know. The speech got interrupted. Someone summoned an ancient red dragon, right, and all sorts of other monsters. They're level 11, which they still might die, which is actually a big fear for me, right? I don't want to kill them. So I'm thinking, you know, what can I do? So I asked this question, like, what would make them have this moment of pause? What if one of their enemies showed up and offered them a truce while fighting the red dragon in order to fight something else that may or may not be a bigger enemy or just a different enemy? What would they do? I don't know how next session's going to go, but I know for me it's going to be interesting. So if you can develop these sort of what-if questions or what would they do, and if either suggestion is interesting to you, then you at least have a general idea of where to go. And if that doesn't work, then, you know, a handful of encounters and you're ready, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can always do. I mean, if your players want to continue kind of playing their same characters and they're not really interested in, hey, let's do a one shot or whatever. I mean, dream sequence. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy to just be like, okay, you know, here we go, and it can just be like a big encounter. You know, I've done and had, you know, my GMs do with us, you know, kind of a gladiator arena kind of thing, just kind of felt a little bit out of nowhere, but at the same time we were all kind of like, hey, we want to play and have fun, and we get that, like, it's been a busy week for you this week, so I don't know, we all got thrown in jail for some shenanigans that we got up to, you know, last session, and now it's a jailbreak, or, you know, whatever. I mean, it's I think fairly easy, as long as your players can be understanding and are willing to just kind of go with you. If the idea is, hey, we want to play and have fun, and even if this is a little bit sideways or kind of next to the actual story that's happening, that's fine, right?
Something that we do often too is if the GM is really busy or didn't have time to plan, or if somebody cancels, often someone else will be like, well, I can run something, you know, which is always fun. Like, who doesn't love building characters? Like, I love building new characters, and so it's like, I'll whip something up, and, you know, just tell me what level and how many magic items I get, and, like, I'm good, you know. So.
Yeah, I very much agree. It's all about expectations. You know, just say that. Just say, you know, we're just here to have a good time. And you know how when, like, TV shows run a little too long and the plot's getting really messy and it's like, musical episode.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, I want to find out what's happening with the serial killer. I don't, like, we're side questing. It's okay. If
Beach vacation episode.
Yes.
Right?
Filler episodes.
If you're just like, we're going to have a musical episode, it's going to get zany, it's going to get a little weird, and we're just going to roll with it. And maybe the stakes are low, right? If we have a really cool storyline that's been building and building and building, we're afraid of messing that up, we're like, oh, there's a 2-week waiting period before we can gain admittance into the city we need to go to. Maybe we're just gonna hang out around camp.
Let's go to a costume party.
Get waylaid by yeah, I don't know. You know, just like figure out. You know, just have that expectation.
Yeah.
I'd also just add there are lots of tools out there, and I'm a big proponent. If you're not trying to monetize your game at all, I'm a big proponent of using any tool that allows you to have fun with friends as often as possible. So there are a lot of generative tools out there, like worldsmith.io, other ones, ChatGPT, and I know that's probably going to spark a few more questions, but you can use that as starting points to get where you want to go, so you can have a fun experience, right? Because I mean, it's a game at the end of the day, right?
For sure.
Thank you.
Can we take a question break and talk about combat?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course we can, Colby.
So I want.
Thank you for your patience, guys. We appreciate it.
I wanna quickly give my top 3 tips for making combat as fun as possible for your players at your table. You might not agree with all of these. I know we've got a lot of experienced DMs in the house, and that's okay. So, thing number 1, and this is like my biggest maybe pet peeve that I see with GMs do sometimes, and it's don't make combat in your game like a tactics game where it's you versus your players, right? And you're constantly trying to like counter their build because you think they're too powerful or something, right? The point of us playing these games is to have fun. And for anybody who watches my YouTube channel ever, you know, I'm always making these optimized, whatever, min-maxed characters. And sometimes they're just like, wow, this character does a lot of damage. And sometimes they're weird, like the warm hug that your son is playing right now. Which was all about like someone who casts heat metal on themselves and then grapples their enemy to do damage. And
a red dragonborn who is immune to fire.
Yeah. And so and that's fun, right? But a lot of times I get comments on videos and they're like, well, that's not even a bad one. Like it gets way worse.
It gets worse.
But you know, a lot of times I'll get comments on the videos and people will be like, oh, this build is so easy to counter. All I have to do as a GM is blah blah blah, right? Fill in the blank. Make flying enemies, or if everybody has dark vision, then it's not going to be. And it's just like, yeah, but like, please don't ever be a GM at my table, because like, why would you do that to your player? If your player comes to you and says, okay, here's my character concept, like, hear me out. It's kind of weird, but I want to be a character who only does damage if somebody attacks me, and then it returns damage via like Armor of Agathis and spells like that. And for your GM to be like, oh, well, I know how to defeat you. It's like, well, that's not the point, right? The point is for your players to have fun and feel powerful. Now, that doesn't mean don't make combat challenging for your players, right? There's a difference. But just be careful that you're not getting in the mindset of, okay, how can I like foil their plans?
Like
right?
us against them.
Yeah, it's not. It's the best GMs, I think, find what their players like to do and then help enable them to do that thing, right? And that's not always combat. That could be role play, that could be utility stuff, whatever. But yeah, just look for ways to do that. In that vein, second point, there are spells and abilities in game that players can use that are a lot of fun for a player to use. They don't work as well if you give them to your monsters. Right? And this is another thing that I see a lot of times where it's like, well, if the players can do it, then my monsters can do it. So like, be careful to use silvery barbs or whatever, right? And silvery barbs aside. And again, I kind of go, well, look, like, it's really cool for me to do things that will like control the enemies and take them out of the fight, right? Doesn't work as well, and some of you might disagree with this, and that's okay. But my opinion, casting Wall of Force on your players so that they can't do anything because they didn't take, Misty Step or whatever, that's not fun as a player to be mind controlled and you can't do anything, right? I mean, combat can already be slow and long, and it might be 30 minutes before you get another turn. And if on your turn you just go, next person, you know what I mean? Like, that's not fun. And so again, like, the mindset should be, I think, like, okay, what can I do in this combat encounter, maybe specifically to help my players feel cool and powerful and fun. Again, not saying don't challenge your players. There are ways to challenge aside from, trying to counter them or remove them from being able to do anything in game, right? Final tip. Like I just said, combat can sometimes turn into a slog. And so just be very aware of like little things you can do to try and speed it up at the table, right? So making sure that you let somebody know, okay, it's your turn and you're on deck, right? Just so that they can go, okay, right, yeah, it's my turn next. Okay, what am I going to be doing? If you've got groups of monsters that kind of do the same thing, especially if they're exactly the same monster, like consider having them all make their attacks at the same time. Consider, instead of rolling for damage, just using like the average damage that it always gives you in the monster manual if you use that, right? This is their average damage. Don't roll for it. Just say, okay, you take 10 damage, and you kind of move on, right? So little things like that can just kind of help keep it moving. If it's been a big fight and there's like 2 goblins left and it's very obvious that like the players have won at this point, like maybe the goblins can run away. Or if your players are murder hobos and they're going to chase them, just you can hand wave it, and be like, okay, yeah, you guys, you took them out, like, good job. And maybe somebody makes an attack and they just happen to take out 2 at once, whatever, right? You can kind of hand wave things at the end so that an already lengthy process can be a little bit sped up. And those are my combat tips.
Yeah. I think too, it's very important to understand. Again, going back to what I was talking about balance. Understanding that some of these like control spells are going to be really, really bad when your players are low level, right? But when they're a little bit higher, it might be okay. Like maybe somebody has counterspell, maybe somebody has Misty Step or has taken that or something like that, right? Like taking those kinds of things into account.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say like never try and, control your players or whatever, but I would say do it sparingly.
Yeah, for sure.
Do it sparingly and find other ways to challenge them.
I heard a story of a group that where their fighter got stunned, and was stunned for like 8 rounds.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous. And like they had people, like the paladin was giving him a +3, and he had all of the things going for him, and he just kept failing. And it's like at that point, as the GM, like there's not a lot you can do.
Legendary save.
Like, exactly. Right. So just being careful about that, making sure everybody's having a good time. So yeah. Should we go back to questions?
Yeah, we got a lot.
Yeah, we've got a big line. So let's get through as many of them as we can.
Okay, mini question first. Colby, can I get a picture with you after this?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. You're one of my favorite YouTubers, at least in the D&D genre.
That's awesome.
I love your builds and stuff, and I want a dyslexic wizard one day. Okay, actual question now. When I had the privilege of being able to DM for my brother and some childhood friends of ours, but as we were doing the campaign, it was just really hard for me to keep up like the energy and the desire to want to do it, to want to prep for it and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I kept trying to have these interesting ideas, and they just always seemed to fall flat with them. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, Halloween was coming up, and I was like, oh, let's do a little side adventure where this haunted house appears. I sent in a thing to the group chat being like, hey, is this something you'd be interested in? And they were like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. So I set up this haunted house, and I set up like different challenges, and they had to do like enough for each of them to get an amulet to get into the basement. And instead they ended up prying up the boards to the basement and going in through that way. It wasn't even a fight because they just had the high ground, and I made the mistake of having...
Oh, they made the
not
mistake.
Very... I made the mistake.
Giving up the high ground.
Yes, they had the high ground. I didn't even realize
they didn't
I
learn
did
from
that.
Anakin.
They should have learned from Anakin. I should have learned from Anakin because they had the high ground.
That's right.
My beholder could barely do anything to them. And so my question is like, how do I make sure that I'm having fun as the game master in the future? Because I've really liked it when I was able to like do a special thing and give one of my characters a special sword that had to do with the religion his paladin was, and it was going to be upgraded as he went along. Like I had this cool thing with that, and it was fun to get to do that with him. But when the time came for me to do something and said something like I thought of that I thought was cool, a lot of times it just didn't seem to.
Yeah.
So
Good question.
Yeah, very good question. In the specific instance you're talking about, where like you had something planned in the basement and they went through that way, right? What I have done in the past is just have the flexibility to like put the bad guy in the last place your players look. Like, it doesn't have to be in the basement. If they go in through the basement, put it in the attic. If they go in through the attic, put it in the basement. Like, you know, if they spend 30 minutes deciding on which way to go in, like, it's gonna be in the opposite place, guys. Like, and that's fine, right? Have that kind of flexibility, but also like the things that excite you are going to be what you do, right? But you do also have to have the expectation of like, maybe this is gonna go sideways, and if it does go sideways, what are you gonna do in response? You know what I mean? Maybe another beholder comes up behind them instead at that point, right? Different strategies like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so try to be more flexible when it comes to, for example, maybe because they weaken the floorboards game in.
Maybe they fall through the base. Yeah, exactly.
Now they took 2d8 bludgeoning damage or something.
And they're prone in front of the beholder.
Not to punish me. And it was like, they were lower level, so it was one of the watered down beholders.
Right.
Because I didn't want to kill them. I just wanted to have a fun signature shadow monster come and attack them.
What else do you guys do to try and ensure that you're having fun as a GM? Because that's so important, right?
It is super.
If the GM gets burned out, then nobody gets to play. So you got to make sure that you're enjoying yourself as a GM.
So what you're talking about is burnout, right? And that happens when you're doing something repetitively and you don't see the benefit, you're not enjoying it, right? So change things up. Do things that are different than you normally do, right? If you are having sort of GM burnout overall, take a session off and have someone else GM for you and cause them problems, right? Do everything that they do to you, not in a spiteful way, but like feeling out what players can do, right?
Whenever I join a group now, I always say I'm more happy to do one-shots.
Exactly. Also, changing up themes, right? If there's something that you do all the time, do something different. Changing up encounters. If you never do puzzles, throw more puzzles in, right? Puzzles are either really hard for players or really easy, right? So that's a kind of nice way to change things up. But change things up, and I think you have to rediscover the playfulness with which you first approached being a GM. And when you're preparing for sessions, often you're like writing things down or looking things up, and that can get pretty tedious, except when you're like, oh, I have this really cool freaking idea. I can't wait for my players to see it. You have to find some way to get back to that where you're just excited just to do it, right? And I think just doing anything that you find even remotely interesting is kind of the spark to get that started.
So kind of what I'm getting here is keep having that fun, keep having those like, oh, hey, here's a haunted house. And then when the player is shenanigan their way out of something, be flexible and pull something out of which end in order to keep it. It's not yes and it's not yes, oh yes, and now you won because you outdid me. It's yes, and now I'm going to challenge you a different way.
Yeah. Exactly. Or maybe they did win, but that's the worst consequence that could happen, right? Like them winning is the bad thing.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Great question.
Thanks.
So we have about 20 minutes left, so we'll try to get through as many of these questions as we can. I would ask, try to keep them pretty general. We don't want to be answering like super specific questions, but try to keep them as general as we can, and we'll get through as many as possible. So here we go. Hi. Speed round.
Okay, so this is a bit of a two-parter. If you just want to address part one, totally fine. So I have never GM'd before. I am GM curious, but I have never actually GM'd. And what I get stuck on is getting that initial seed of an idea. So my main question is, where do you look to get that seed of an idea? Because when I think of movies and books and stories that inspire me, and I look to them for inspiration, I think, well, maybe if I copy and pasted it into a RPG system, and that's kind of all I've got. That's
not a bad idea.
You're ready.
Okay, that's okay. Sure. I like to ask my players what they're excited about. I know one of the first sessions I GM'd was for a gal who does like speed shooting with pistols and stuff. Like she competes, and so we did an Old West style. And it was really fun for her. She loved it. So that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I would say don't be afraid of running like pre-written modules either, especially as a first-time GM. Sometimes they can get a bad rap, but I mean, some of the most fun I've had as a player and as a GM have been, with official Wizards of the Coast modules, right? Yeah. Or doesn't have to be D&D, obviously. I know there are other game systems out there. But yeah, like they're done by professional writers and they're pretty good, right? Like, and so look up, and even if you want to just do like maybe a series of one-shots or kind of smaller campaigns, it doesn't have to be Curse of Strahd or, Tyranny of Dragons. It could be Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and they've got like some good little just quick kind of 1, 2, 3 shot campaigns in there that can kind of help you get your feet wet and kind of, but sort of hold your hand a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then you might just take it from there and run into something like that's totally homebrewed, or move those players onto another module.
I'd also add, you're talking about like a plot hook, right? And I like to coincide campaign starting plot hooks with galvanizing events, where you need something to get the party to stay together for some time. And for that to happen, the party needs to be in the same location, have the same motivations, and go in the same direction. So as long as they're in some location, and then you start asking them about their backstories, you can easily come up with some sort of galvanizing event, meaning, hey, here's a quest you guys need to go on, or hey, all of you guys have been framed for murder, and they're running towards you from this direction. That's a pretty easy way to start an adventure, and then you're rolling from there.
Okay, great, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a quick question, actually not about modules, but homebrew specific. So something that I have a hard time with is kind of stepping back and doing that process thing, specifically with world building. I want to flesh out every single town, and then it gets way too bogged down. I had this with my first campaign that I homebrewed for, and it was a little bit of a headache. What are some ways that I can still inspire take stuff from their backstories and make a world that they enjoy without getting too much in the nitty gritty? And what's the best ways that you guys have done homebrew that I can try for myself? That's a lot in that question. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. For non-monetized games, I use ChatGPT a lot. I tell it, give me a list of 10 townsfolk and their occupations, right? Give me a list of 10 businesses within this town or whatever, so that if my players are going somewhere, I can say, oh, you want to go into a metalsmith shop. I did not prepare a metalsmith shop. Here's the shop owner's name. What are you looking for? And I roll a dice to see if they have it or not, right? It's all in the yes and, right? You want to, if it makes you excited to prepare as much of that as possible, and you're eager to do that, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just understand that your players might not go to every place. You know what I mean? Right. And you shouldn't try to make them go to every place, right? Let them go where they are excited to go, and explore what they're excited to explore. That's the sandbox, right? So does that help?
Yes, that gives me some.
Yeah, I'll add something to that. I love TTRPGs because the story is bound by time and space, right? Mm-hmm. Things happen here at a certain time. Meaning, if you want your world building to be relevant to the story, put your players somewhere and let them start doing stuff. And you'll build stuff around the world, but you'll build more out where they are. Yes. And until they go somewhere else, you don't need to really fully worry about that. And I'm fairly certain Critical Role did this with their first campaign, their second campaign. They spent most of their time in one area, and then they kind of moved and they kind of expanded as they leveled up. I find that very helpful because even in the DMG, it says levels 1 through 5, you're like a local town hero.
Local hero.
Exactly. And then as you level up, your sphere of influence expands.
Yeah, start with the place that they are. And just focus on that place. And if you want to think a little bit about the political factions in neighboring towns and what the pantheon looks like and all of that kind of stuff, fine, but don't get too into the weeds because it might not ever even come up in game, right? I would say start with where they are and let them sort of help guide you to what comes next.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
We do have about 5 minutes left.
5 minutes.
Just so you're aware.
All right. Question from a mom of young kids who would love to dabble in GMing but feels very overwhelmed by the sheer amount of prep that can go into it. What are the top 2 to 3 things you would say are absolutely essential in prep versus what can fall to the wayside?
How old are your kids?
Preschool.
Okay, get some stuffed animals. And those are their characters. Okay, I did this with my sons.
Oh, I'm talking like dabbling with my friends playing, not
Oh,
like.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not starting my kids yet. That's later.
So she doesn't have a lot of time.
Gotcha.
because
Not a
she's
lot
got
of
small
time.
kids.
Gotcha. That's a different question. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, what are the most important things to prep?
Yeah, versus what can be skipped
Right.
for now.
When time is of the essence.
Yeah. I mean, I would lean on modules, I think. You know what I mean? Read through a chapter, make sure you're familiar with it. And if you think there's any holes there, like, think about it, fill them in. But, I mean...
Yeah, like give yourself a week or 2 or 3 and say, hey, next month we're going to play, this module, and then that'll give you time to read it on your spare time and kind of go, okay, it looks like there's kind of a gap between what happens here and what happens here. How am I going to help them get from point A to point B? And just sort of, plan it out a little bit in your head. But yeah, I think leaning on modules is big there because it's going to take the burden of the world building largely off your shoulders, not completely.
Also, you don't have to run the rules to the extent that they exist, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So, like, focus on the core mechanics. So, a lot of, like, D20 systems, you're like, okay, everybody at the table. At times, we're going to test, do a skill check. And you're going to roll a D20, and then we're going to figure out what happens with that. You could even start so easy as to say, we're not going to worry about modifiers right now. We're just going to focus on the one die roll. And then you start introducing things as you feel comfortable and your players feel comfortable. Don't worry about being like, I have to download the entire SRD to my brain and run this perfectly somehow, or I'm upsetting the gods or something. Just focus on what is the heart of the system. What are the stories we want to tell? Scale up as your comfort level goes. Just start. This is fun and it's not necessarily correct, but we're just gonna go as we go at our own pace.
And to the point of a session 0, make sure your players are aware that, hey, I'm starting. Give me some grace, right? Make sure that they're forgiving to you and you're forgiving to them, and just roll with it.
I'd also add, I know we're short of time. Being a GM means you do have to develop skills. Improv is a perfect skill to develop in this instance, and you can practice every session, right? You don't have to plan everything, and using pre-written modules, you can yes and the module, almost creating problems for yourself to work on later, right? Oh, great, I gave them this item. What is the item? That's a problem you can work on and kind of help yourself do session prep, but improv, definitely a good thing to work on.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Maybe the last question. Where's our
time person?
Cut our mics. I don't know.
I don't think they left. We'll keep going. I think we're still. Go ahead.
So my question has to do with introverted people when it comes to how do you encourage shy players or introverts to participate in games. I work with a lot of game stores, so I see a lot of people come in, and some people are really like to participate. Some people come in and they're a little shy. And is there any tips or tricks you can give to help encourage people at the table?
Yeah, backstory hooks, when they sit down, you're like, okay, what's your character's favorite tea? I don't know, who's a family member they care about, whatever. Just really simple bite-sized things. And if I see other players really engaged with what's going on and introverted characters maybe a little shy or something, I'm like, oh, this is interesting because this one, your favorite tea is somehow involved or something. And you need to be able to interact with that to help your whole group figure something out. Or this family member of yours shows up and they're acting very suspiciously or something like that. So you just grab a few simple hooks, easy questions to answer. These are just simple, tiny hooks. And you just pull them into the story as you need to make sure they get equal engagement and their characters equally material to the plot.
And I would add there are probably a lot of players who are maybe shy, but also don't really know what to do. You know what I mean? And so the question, what would you like to do, is a really good,
like, hey, you haven't said anything in a few minutes. Is there anything you'd like to do right now? Your character would like to do, right?
Yeah, and not necessarily what are you going to do on your turn? Are you going to make an acrobatics check to do something? You know what I mean? But
giving little suggestions.
What would you like to do? Like right now, in this moment, what would your character enjoy doing? Right? And they might say, "Oh, I want to punch some bad guys," or "I want to swing from the chandeliers," like whatever. You know what I mean? I want to do a performance at the tavern. Great. Like you can help them do that and maybe help them understand what that might look like. Right? Okay. Well, then in that case, why don't you have a chat with the bartender and see if they're looking for somebody to perform for the tavern guests tonight, etc.
Yeah. Awesome.
I just finish up that up with take what you can get and then use positive reinforcement, right?
Yes.
Anything they do, awesome.
Yeah.
Real quick before we end, do any of you four have your favorite resource for answering GM questions? Like a subreddit or Facebook group or something like that?
There's a lot of great YouTubers out there that I love and follow, and not my channel.
But also subscribe.
If you're looking for a big bad to challenge your players with, then yes. But if you're looking for good DM tips, Ginny D, the Dungeon Dudes. There's so many out there that have really great, Matt Colville. I mean, there's lots of great content creators out there that have wonderful tips, tricks, ideas, suggestions. Also, there's great resources out there too to help. I love Describe. If anybody's familiar with that, if you're looking for just my players are going to be at a graveyard, go on to Describe and just type graveyard, and it'll give you this great descriptive box text that you can read. That awesome. When your players approach, you can have this it makes it look like you're really good and you've planned and prepared and written this beautiful description about your graveyard or whatever, right? So yeah, those are my two.
Cool. Did you have anything to add?
I mean, just
or Google. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts. If you haven't GM'd yet, go do it. I don't know what you're waiting for. If you're waiting for the perfect session, so am I. So good luck. But I'm still waiting for the world's greatest dungeon master out there. So whichever one of you is it, come talk to me.
And then I would just say, this sounds like a weird one, but don't be afraid of trying different systems. D&D 5e is not the only system out there. You don't know if you like something until you try it. So just be willing to experiment. A game, just really quick, Dan Wells introduced me to is 10 Candles. That game broke my brain wide open, made me a way better game designer, way better GM. So just play with different systems. It'll teach you a lot more range as a GM, and then you can bring that back to whatever you're doing.
I was at my local game store last week and found a game called Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
Yes. and magical.
And I was like, I want to play this game.
Yep.
It looked amazing. So yes, there are a million out there.
Yep. So if anybody still has questions, you guys please feel free to come up and we can try to address those. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming, you guys. We really appreciate you being here. It was so fun.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode. As I mentioned, today was a very special episode, particularly special for me. Being able to do that. It was my first experience doing that. Very cool experience. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second in the Patreon only portion. But before that, I want to give you, the listener, a challenge based on today's show. Obviously, the content of today's show is about getting into GMing, I guess, and really pushing yourself. If you don't feel like you're ready, doing it anyways. I would give you all the challenge to go try out a different game system and then bring back something from that game system to your next D&D session. Try something new. Push yourself out of your comfort zone and see what new horizons you discover. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. We've, over the last few years, grown a lot. And it's just, I feel so lucky and blessed, honestly. Where we are now, I could never have imagined. So we just want to give you a big thank you. And just here's a big digital hug from me, even though I'm not a hugger. Before we close the show, some other thank yous that are due. First of all, thank you to Benj Weyland, who is our new graphic designer. You'll see more designs from him coming out. Also, kind of a spoiler alert, but we are changing our branding, so we're going to leak that out little by little. You'll probably see bits and pieces here and there. But thanks, Ben. And if you guys need graphic design work, definitely let us know. We'll connect you with Benj, and he does good work. Next, we'd like to thank our Discord moderators. They are awesome people. So we got Juka, we got Tech Senpai, and we got TJ Maxx. You guys are doing such great work on our Discord and just making it a way more fun place and doing things that me and Tanner never really could make happen on our own. So you guys are indispensable. Lastly, we want to thank our patron, the main patron right now, which is Foxy Beard. You are helping us keep the lights on. Come back next time for another special episode with our guest and friend, Jay Foster from Swell Initiative for round 2. He's the first podcast guest to make a double appearance on the show. Technically, Ashley Mae King was the first one, but that's because I messed up and didn't record her first episode. Whatever. So come back next time for that special episode with Jay Foster and see that handcrafted special episode just for you. Until then, though, let's go ahead and roll initiative. Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.